Good evening, everybody. It's 2 minutes past 7 o'clock. My name is Alexander Falk, and I'm the district governor for Rotary District 7930, northeastern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. And it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our next webinar installation, our DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion discussion series. And with that, I will turn it over to David Hart, our DEI committee chair. David, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure having everybody here, and thank you for joining our training. Tonight, we have Lieutenant Glen Mills from the Burlington Police Department, a highly accredited trainer who has presented on several different topics across the U.S. and in Canada. Tonight, Lieutenant Mills is going to speak to us about unconscious bias and bias. So I'm going to hand it over to Lieutenant Mills. Before I do that, I just want to also acknowledge the DEI committee for helping to put this evening together, and especially Pooja Singla. I apologize, Pooja, if I said that wrong. who found our speaker and has really got us to where we are this evening. So, Lieutenant Mills, I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right, thank you. Will I be able to share my screen? Looks like it's disabled.
Yeah, we can make that happen. 1 second.
Okay. Well, how about right now? We just start with.
You ready?
And it's too bad we can't do this live. It's a lot more fun. But when we talk about bias, we're talking about really the brain. And, you know, if you see certain things, some people see things. And this is great when you do this in a classroom, because you'll actually see people, and I can see some of you on your screens, those of you that have your video turned on. And I like to walk around the room with these props. And you know, it's really funny. These are all toys, right? The rubber snake, rubber bug, spider, cockroach. And it never fails. Some people just can't help it. They react. They know it's fake. They know it's not real. Why? Why are they doing that? Right? You know it's a fake thing. Some of you right now are like, you have the heebie-jeebies just from seeing these things. I pulled these little toys out on a video screen. I'm somewhere else in Burlington, far away from you, and you just saw these little things. And right away you had a reaction. You couldn't even help it. You couldn't even help it. So why is that? Why do we have these biases? So I got into this topic years ago. I took an instructor certification course to teach implicit bias, bias-based policing. This was back in 2009, and it was a hot topic at that time. The state decided, hey, we should really be training police officers on these issues. And they came up with a new program to try to fight these things. And in the past few years, I got really interested in how this all ties together into so much of what we do. Whether you're a police officer, or you own a business, or you work for a nonprofit, or you know, anything that you do with the public or with other people, these things all tie together. It all ties together too with the other hot topic of today is de-escalation. Because it all comes down to brain science, right? So this isn't brain surgery, as my first instructor said, but he said, we're going to be talking a lot about, this is the brain, and this is stuff that we can't control as much. Bias can influence all of our decision making. We all have biases. It can cause us to make assumptions. We can end up taking these mental shortcuts that can sometimes get us into trouble. Oftentimes they're a survival mechanism, but when bias goes bad, right, it can oftentimes get us into a lot of trouble and cause us to make bad decisions. And if you're in the business community, this bias, this can kind of creep in and have you make decisions that really aren't in your own best interest. And you're not doing it deliberately, right? Everybody has these things sort of built into them, but it just happens. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, all right, we all have these goals, right? We have to assume that most people are good, and I get to meet good people, mostly good people. Sometimes I meet bad people, but most people are good. Most people have good intentions, and we all want to have a more fair society. We want to have more fairness. We want to have more diversity, and we want to have people feel included, and we want to have equity and fairness, right? So what can we do about that? It's really difficult because we may be doing things without realizing it. We may be making mental shortcuts when it comes time to make a hiring decision. And it's not, we're not intending to have this outcome where it's a bad outcome. We're just doing things that our brain was wired up to do. And, a combination of things we're born with, and also a combination of things that we learn along the way and we're exposed to. You may have seen a lot of videos of policing in the past couple of years that have been really negative. And I can tell you, I come across people now that are more afraid of police than they used to be. And what it is these mental images keep popping up over and over again. Negative images, negative images, negative images. It's burned into our brain, into our subconscious. And then when we see something, we'll have a bad reaction to it. And there are all of these different things that happen that can develop into biases. And biases can be good, right? So some of us have a bias towards fairness. Some people will be biased towards helping others, right? You might have a bias towards, if you have the option between sweet food and savory food. I have a bias towards sweets. I like chocolate more than vanilla. That's all good, right? But when bias is bad, it could become prejudice. Prejudice is a synonym for bias, but we usually use it in a more negative connotation. So I think, honestly, having met so many people over the years, most people don't want to be prejudiced. Most people don't want to be biased, and they have good intentions. So I think if we understand more about our own biases, maybe we can work towards slowly but surely making things better. So let me see, I can share my screen. I'll give you a good example of bias. And maybe some of you have seen this. But we all make assumptions when we see somebody. And sometimes, or oftentimes, we can be wrong.
Hi, what's your name, darling?
My name is Susan Boyle.
Okay, Susan, where are you from?
I am from Blackburn near Bathgate, West Lothian.
It's a big town.
It's a sort of collection of, villages. I had to think there.
And how old are you, Susan?
I am 47. And that's just one side of me.
Okay, what's the dream?
I'm trying to be a professional singer.
And why hasn't it worked out so far, Susan?
I've never been given the chance before, but here's hoping it'll change.
Okay, and who would you like to be as successful as?
Elaine Page.
Elaine Page.
What are you going to sing tonight?
I'm going to sing I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables.
Okay.
Big song.
Yeah? Yes.
I dreamed a dream in time gone by, when hopes my life was living.
You didn't expect that, did you? Did you? No.
I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. I was young and unafraid. When dreams are made and used and wasted, there was a ransom to you tear your hopes apart, as eternal dreams to share. Still I dream you'd come to me, and we could live our lives together. But there are dreams which cannot be, and there are storms we cannot weather. I had a dream like life would be, so different from this hell I'm living, so different now from what it seems. Now life has killed the dream I dreamed.
Hello.
Hey, come back here.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. Piers.
Without a doubt, that was the biggest surprise I have had in 3 years on this show. When you stood there with that cheeky grin and said, I want to be like Elaine Page, everyone was laughing at you. No one is laughing now. That was stunning, an incredible performance. Amazing. I'm reeling from shock. How about you two? But
I am
Can't believe
so
it.
thrilled because I know that everybody was against you. I honestly think that we were all being very cynical, and I think that's the biggest wake-up call ever. And I just want to say that it was a complete privilege listening to that. It was brilliant.
Susan, I knew the minute you walked out
Oh, Simon!
on that stage that we were going to hear something extraordinary, and I was right.
Not a lot of touch.
Susan, you are a little tiger, aren't you?
Oh, I don't know about that.
You
I don't know
are.
about that.
Okay, moment of truth. Piers, yes or no?
the biggest yes I have ever given anybody.
Amanda?
Yes, definitely. Brilliant. Amanda, you too!
Susan Boyle, you can go back to the village with your head held high. It's 3 yeses.
Some people admitted, like, hey, I didn't expect that. So I think that was a great example of bias that everybody has. You see this woman come out, she's, you know, not what you expect for a great singer. And then it turned out everyone was blown away by her performance. So, but it's a really good clip. And if you get to see it, you can find it on YouTube, Susan Boyle's first audition. And it's really just a great illustration of bias. All right. So what's going on here? We're sort of all prisoners of our own brains, right? There's a theory called the triunal brain from Paul MacLean. And Paul MacLean said, all right, the brain is constructed of the neocortex, that's our outer brain, the limbic system, that's our emotions, and then the reptilian brain. And what's happened to us, we've evolved over the years. You know, we're very simple. We had to survive. So your brain, you may have already had a natural fear of things like spiders and snakes and bugs, because back in thousands of years ago, those things were poisonous. They could hurt you. But maybe you didn't have a natural fear of saber-toothed tigers. But as you're growing up, you see somebody in your area get attacked and killed by a saber-toothed tiger. Now that's programmed into your brain, that limbic system. Next time you see a saber-toothed tiger, you're gonna react, and you're gonna go into your fight or flight mode. And scientists will talk about this, the neocortex, the limbic system, and the reptilian brain. They'll say that fight or flight syndrome, they call it the 4 Fs. And it's fight, flight, food, and reproduction. And some people are getting the joke, like, oh yeah, wait, 4 Fs, fight, flight, food, and reproduction. But what he was saying was that limbic system, that controls our basic needs. That reptilian brain is your instinct and survival, that limbic system, your emotions, and you have less control over that reptilian brain. That's your instincts that are going to kick in when you encounter violence and different things. And then your limbic system, we're all sort of prisoners of this. And our limbic brain, it's made up of different parts, but the big part of it, I guess, that gets us into trouble is probably the amygdala. And the amygdala, sometimes people will refer to amygdala hijack, being that part of your brain that controls that fight or flight response. And what you're going to find is when people are under a high degree of stress, and I can tell you, I've seen it many times, they stop thinking. Under a high degree of stress, they stop thinking and they start reacting. And you can see it happen to people. And how does this relate to bias? Well, bias could be something like a survival skill for some people. You see somebody that looks scary to you. Like if you saw someone, maybe if you saw me as a teenager, I was into punk rock music and stuff, and I didn't look like I do now. And if you saw me and my friends walking down the street, you probably would have crossed the street to avoid us, because it would have been scary for some people. Like, wow, those people look scary. People have mohawks and purple hair. And, oh no. And I'm talking about back in the 1980s. It wasn't like today where you see that stuff more commonly. Well, that's not because you're bad people or you didn't know that we were nice kids. That's because that's your bias is kicking in, and it's your reptilian brains or survival mechanism. You see something that might be kind of threatening and you're not familiar with it, and you avoid it, right? You go into that fight or flight mode. Okay, flight, let's avoid this. And let's see if I can shut off the screen sharing. So you avoid this, and that's a survival mechanism. So what are we talking about here with the limbic system, and how does that affect us? Well, we have different biases. So there are different types of biases, and these are sort of like mental shortcuts that we take, and we can't help it. So it plays into DEI when you're talking about hiring people, promoting people. When you get into a dispute with somebody, sometimes it'll be a very minor dispute, but when there are misunderstandings and then that emotional system takes over, they become major disputes. So some good examples of biases that we have could be something like affinity bias. And that's when we have a natural connection to people who are similar to us. And maybe you see this when you interview someone and you go, oh, you grew up in Burlington too. Well, I grew up in Burlington. We have an affinity. So maybe you're going to be biased more towards that candidate than somebody else who comes in the door. Or, hey, you went to BU and I went to BU, or whatever it is, right? Affinity bias. And that could also be in-group bias, right? So we see it with policing, like, oh, you're a police officer? Police officers, we meet each other all around the country and all around the world, and we automatically have a bias. We're like, oh, we're police officers, right? We're going to be friends. We're going to get along really well. And it might not be the case. You might not get along with that person, but there's that affinity bias or in-group bias. There's also perception bias, and that could also be stereotyping. So if I say certain words, I say certain things, like think about the picture that comes into your mind. What if I say old? What comes into your mind? Well, maybe, if you have a 90-year-old grandmother who's still like a bodybuilder, right? But that's not the first thing that's going to come into your mind. Usually we think of, oh, we start thinking of sort of these things like, oh, you know, not able to move as fast. We have these biases, but there are older people out there who can do a lot of different things that you might not expect. What if we say young? Or what if we say fit, like fitness? What if we talk about tall people and short people? And I know there are studies out there and they show that usually when you line up taller candidates and shorter candidates for jobs, people will hire the taller candidates. How about good looks? Good looking, handsome, pretty, beautiful versus, you know, not so good looking. Better looking people do better with promotions and things. And that's just a fact. And is it because they're more talented or they work harder? No, that is not the case, but it's biases. One of my favorite movies of all time is it's from Akira Kurosawa. It's a movie called Sanjuro. And in Sanjuro, these young samurai, they find out about corruption in their clan, but they don't trust the most trustworthy guy in the whole family because he has a horse face. He's ugly. And the guy who's corrupt is very handsome. So everybody believes the handsome guy, even though he's corrupt. And if you ever get a chance to see it, it's a great movie. And it's one of the few that they haven't turned into a Western, but it's all about bias, right? We trust people that are good looking. We distrust people who aren't as good looking. And it's not based on anything except for our own biases. And we all have it. Maybe, you know, maybe you don't realize it. How about the halo effect? I know I've seen this many times. So the halo effect is when you project positive qualities on people based on, like, you know, one thing you know about them, or maybe because of their looks, or because of one of these other biases, like an affinity bias. So you meet someone and you go, oh, you know, they're good looking, and oh, they went to the same school that I did, and they grew up in the same town that I did. And subconsciously, they could tell you, oh, I'm a good violin player, even though if they don't play the violin. You just have this halo effect. Everything you think around them is good. Well, they must be a good manager. They must be a good hire. They must be good to promote. And it's the halo effect. And unfortunately, it's not always true. Somebody could be a real smooth talker, good looking, well-dressed, but as dumb as a box of rocks, right? You just don't know. But we all have these biases. We're going to meet people and we're going to think, oh, what a great guy. And they, you know, meanwhile, oh, they're a horrible person. The other things that we do, and it's kind of funny that this is human nature, right? So confirmation bias. And you'll see this, people engage in this all the time, especially in political discourse and when they're arguing online. I don't know if you've ever seen people who argue online. And people with confirmation bias, what they do is they completely look for things that back up their pre-existing notions. So if I told you, oh, there's a study that shows that your type of business or your type of nonprofit is the best, the people who do that, the people who work and do the work that you do are the best people all around, right? And you're going to say, yeah, of course, right? You go, oh, there's a study that says that. Meanwhile, 6 studies say, no, that's not true. It's all random, right? But you're still going to go, well, yeah, but that one study says people who do my job are the best people. That's confirmation bias. We seek out those things that make us like, oh, we agree with that. And you'll see that with hiring and promotions, and people will look for the things they like in people, and they will see something that maybe this person did one project. The person you like did one project. Ah, see, I knew that kid was a great worker, and yeah, we're going to promote them. Versus the other person could have done 6 excellent projects, but you're not going to notice them. The confirmation bias makes you focus heavily on that one thing that re-upped what you believed in that other person, if that makes sense. Confirmation bias, we all do it. Another big problem we have is groupthink. So groupthink is when we get together with a bunch of people and we don't want conflict in the group. So we're talking about hiring someone or promoting someone. And maybe somebody in the group is a little bit stronger, more persuasive, and they can sway that entire group like, oh, we should hire this guy, or we should promote this person. And the rest of the group eventually kind of comes around like, oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Even if they strongly disagree, I've seen it many times, groupthink. You can see a whole entire group of people make a bad decision. And if you're really interested in this stuff, this happened with the Space Shuttle Challenger. There was a massive problem with groupthink in NASA at that time. And that's how they came up with this series of errors that wound up getting all those astronauts killed. It was just groupthink. They couldn't get out of, this is the way things are, and these are the right decisions. And then it was just all a bunch of people who were afraid to challenge that, right? And then we have negativity biases. So if we have an unpleasant memory, and let's say we encountered somebody of a particular group, that one bad incident is much more powerful in our feelings than a whole bunch of normal memories, right? So with the police, we see this, okay? Maybe you've encountered the police 100 times in your life, but 99 of those times were really boring, like nothing, like, hi, everything's fine and uneventful. But that one time you got pulled over by the grouchy police officer who was not pleasant, that's it. All cops are bad. Well, we do that too with other people, other groups, young people, older people, people of different races. There are people who just say, well, I had a bad encounter with somebody in the city and that's it. That's how I feel about that entire group of people. Somebody who speaks a different language. I had a run in with someone with, who spoke that language, and all those people from that whole country are bad. Now that's crazy, right? That's consciously, we all know that's insane to believe that. However, human beings being what they are, that's a bias. And that's something that happens to us. And it all goes back to those prehistoric times when we saw the saber-toothed tiger and the saber-toothed tiger ate somebody. And from now on, we don't like saber-toothed tigers. That's all we're going to remember, right? You could find a saber-toothed tiger kitten and, oh, it's nice, but no, saber-toothed tigers are all bad. That's a survival mechanism. But we do it and we exaggerate these things in our brain. We have an encounter with a person of a particular group, and all the people in that group in our subconscious are bad or just not desirable, right? So that's it. That's really what it all comes down to. Is it's really our brains are making us do all these things, because it's not, for most people, it's not conscious, it's unconscious, it's implicit. Explicit bias is that outright racism. We just had a group up in New Hampshire. They're charging them with a civil rights violation for hanging a racist barrier, right? Those people explicitly believe awful things, right? That's conscious. They're doing it on purpose. Most people, though, don't believe in that. They don't support that. They want to be fair. They want to be just, and they want to do a good thing. But they may have biases. And when somebody comes walking in the door for a job, I don't know, maybe that person wasn't dressed the right way. We place a lot of emphasis on that. But what if that person couldn't afford to go out and buy a nice suit and they're just dressed the best they can? Well, our biases are going to work against us in that case, because maybe they were a great candidate, but we didn't hire them. We didn't give them a chance. So what are we going to do about all this, right? Let me share my screen again. There's one kind of thing here. And this isn't necessarily, this is sort of controversial, right? It's called the IAT, or the implicit associations test from Harvard University. And you can go on here. I don't know if this is really scientifically valid. They say it is, but nobody can really prove whether or not it is. But I think it's interesting, because even if you take this, even if it's not a valid test, you can actually go through these things and think about how you feel. when you're seeing these images. So they have several IATs. You can look at these like Arab, Muslim, transgender, presidents. I was actually going to pull up pictures of presidents as examples, because when you see a picture of Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Richard Nixon, people have strong feelings, strong, immediate emotional reactions. And it's the same thing. The IAT, what this does, it measures your responses to pictures. And then it will tell you like, oh, you have a bias for or a bias against something. And it goes through age, weight, sexuality, race, disabilities, religion, weapon. So if you take these tests, whether they're, whatever they tell you, I would ask you, if you take them, check them out. They're really interesting. And then examine, when you take these, how do I feel when I see these images? When certain images pop up, do I get a feeling? And I think if you're honest with yourself, you'll kind of say, oh, wait a minute. I did get kind of these feelings like when I saw older people. And you know what? I'm not proud of that. And I don't feel good about that. And I don't think it's right. But I did have those feelings, and I recognize it now. And once you recognize it, you can actually do something about it. Takes a lot of work though, because you can't just do an IAT test one time and say, oh, well, it says I'm not racist. It says I'm not sexist. It says I'm not biased. Okay. But if you had feelings when you saw certain images, maybe you got to look at that a little bit and say, okay, next time I'm out and about, when I see people in these situations, I'm going to talk to myself for a second and say, whoa, wait a second. You just made an assumption about that person based on how they look. Okay. I'm going to try not to do that now. Right. So your own strategies to confront this would be to be aware of it and maybe challenge some of these stereotypes. Maybe you have some stereotypes in your head, like when you see somebody and you get that feeling like, oh, that guy looks like a loser. Oh, look at that guy with all the tattoos. Oh, tattoos, maybe some people are biased against tattoos. Oh, what a horrible person. Turns out, wow, they're such a nice person. There's a guy who teaches for the Anti-Defamation League, and he came to one of the conferences that we held down on Cape Cod for crime analysis, and he's covered up in tattoos, and he has full sleeves, both arms, all the way up to his neck, covered. One of the nicest guys you would ever meet. And he's Jewish, and he talks about neo-Nazis. So he carries around a whole suitcase full of Nazi paraphernalia, which is really crazy, right? He starts pulling this stuff out to teach about it, to teach about hate. And when you first see him, you might even think like, oh, that guy a Nazi? Like, no, he's not. But that's a bias that we all have. And I can admit it. Like, I saw that guy and I said, whoa, he's not what I expected at all. I'm thinking a guy from the ADL, I'm expecting some really buttoned up, suit, boring kind of guy. And I meet this guy and I said, oh, wow, not what I expected at all. So you challenge those stereotypes with yourself and try to think of situations where it's like, wow, I was wrong about that. You try to spend time with other people in other groups. This is really hard nowadays. It's really hard to go out and socialize and do things with people. But I made a point when I was younger. I spent time trying to leave Burlington as much as possible. I grew up here, but as soon as I could drive, I started going into Boston. I started hanging around in different places because I wanted to meet different people. Burlington back in the 70s and 80s, it was really more homogenous, very white, very plain, suburb. And I went into the city seeking out, and I was lucky because I got to meet people from all walks of life, homeless people, people who came from all over the world, going to schools there. And it really opened my eyes. And it was a great opportunity for me to learn about other people. I think it's really hard to do that today, but it's well worth it. If you get a chance to maybe join a group that's a little different than what you normally do, with more diverse people, try to, maybe I see a lot of bias today against young people. You talk about young people today, and what's the first thing everyone thinks of? Oh, they're on their phones, oh, they're fragile. Oh, they don't work hard. you know, besides the phone part, you know, who used to say that was like Plato, you know, think of Aristotle. These kids today, young people, I'm lucky I get to teach children a safety program, and I get to meet normal kids, and they're not bad, right? And the kids coming up today in our job, yeah, they have some issues. They're different, but they're not bad. They're good kids. And I think in some ways they're better than my generation. They're nicer. They're, you know, not as mean. So try to seek out those different groups of people, and having those opportunities really is helpful. Try to look for alternative viewpoints when you know, talk to people. I see a lot of online discourse gets really hostile, but maybe instead of talking, try listening more. And, you know, it's hard to do, again, hard to do, but trying to take another person's viewpoint can be really helpful. And then challenging assumptions and traditions. This is another thing. There are a lot of traditions out there that we have to adhere to. Policing can be very traditional, right? We have a certain image and different things that we do, but I think we have to change and evolve. And policing is just a reflection of all of you, right? That's all it is. Policing, police is society, and all the people in the Rotary Club, all the people in Burlington, we're just a reflection of the town and the community. And we have to change with the times. We have to realize the world's not the same, and the kids coming up today are different, and they're not bad. And maybe we try to give them a chance. We challenge our own assumptions. We look for alternative viewpoints, and maybe we can hopefully work on some of our biases and reduce them, and hopefully have a more fair and equitable and diverse society. So I think maybe did I talk enough? Should we open it up to questions, do you think, or?
Yeah, I think it's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lieutenant Mills. Now is the time, as many of you have been on our calls before, now is the time that we open it up to the audience for questions. If I could just real quick, I find it interesting that you brought up the implicit bias test from Harvard, because within the last 6 months, I read a couple articles, and it's back under scrutiny right now. So it seems like they're very popular for a while, then they go into scrutiny, and then they'll come back very popular. So it's interesting, but you're right. It's an eye-opening experience when you do take them. And, you know, you walk in, and I'm in human resources. We're constantly talking about diversity of candidates and an equitable workforce and a representative workforce. And you take these and you look at these implicit bias tests, and you take them. And if you're answering them honestly, it really does make you stop and think about, you know, you're right. Where did all this come from? And but anyway, I want to open it up to others for questions. Either just shout out, or you can raise your hand and we'll go, or put something in the chat if you'd like.